you went over this like with Aristotle's metaphysics, where I would always seem to me like, why could the atheist make the sort of justification? Well, in order to like argue, you need logic, and so it's like forming a transcendental argument for logic. Like by denying logic, you affirm it. So therefore, logic is necessary.
Yeah, well, this is covered. Yeah, but that doesn't count as justification. So in other words, just by showing that it doesn't seem possible that it could be otherwise, actually does not get you to the status of justification. If you read the Mannion paper, he goes into that because he shows that, for example, how do you know that the world isn't other than what you don't conceive to be possible? You don't, right? So just the argument of retorsion, which is something Aristotle says and something that a lot of Roman Catholics will try to say as a response to tag on these points, they'll think that that is what grants justification. That actually doesn't grant justification, and the Mannion paper goes into why that is. Father Deacon often brings this up. Are you there?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, they're just positing the inability to
conceive of it another way.
Doesn't I can't not use logic. Why does that equal a justification? Oh, because I said so, or because we all agree. Like, so again, they never get to the question of justification. Or in other words, what is your criteria for your justification criteria? And you'll always find it's just some arbitrary assertion.
Well, it has to be this.
Oh, I can't do this, or because we all agree, or. But that doesn't answer the question.
Right. So the way that people, if you read the Quine paper and if you read Father Deacon's paper on Quine, you'll notice that what happens is that anyone that wants to dispense with the older classic idea of JTB and then Gettier problem, they want to dispense with those older, quote, ideas of justification. You're basically left with psychologism. You're left with Quine saying we're not doing epistemology anymore, we're doing psychology. Well, if you're doing psychology, then you've given up any possibility of justification, and that's the whole point of that paper. I mean,
what about? Oh, sorry.
What?
I was
what about
say,
what?
Like, what about like things that JTB is important, but like some people like will try to alter the justification criteria, not by getting rid of it, but either say it's by through a reliable method, or like Putnam, like there's this external relationship to the world.
Yeah,
like,
those all beg the question. I mean, what counts as a reliable method? Is it 80% accuracy, 90% accuracy? Why should we accept that 90% accuracy counts as justification? It's just all falls into arbitrariness, as Father Deacon said.
That's true. It seems like it would be kind of arbitrary how you would find a reliable method. For like,
well, if you
like,
read the wood,
presupposes that you have
it begs the question.
A reliable method for determining what's a reliable method. Right?
So if you read the Wood book, he actually goes through all of the attempts to rescue justification in the ways that you're describing, and he talks about how kind of just bankrupt they are.
They'll also encounter things like Moore's argument, or like denying the principle of epistemic closure and stuff like that. Like some people I've seen try to like deny that, like basically defeat skepticism by arguing that the skeptics' worries are just incoherent in their own basis.
Yeah, but that doesn't get you to justification. Just like retorsion doesn't get you to justification, because for example, all I have to do is pose a counterexample like. Maybe we are brains in a vats. Maybe I'm a schizophrenic and we just think that the logic that we have matches up to the external world, but you don't know that. And so those attempts at justification beg the question in terms of justification. If you
they argue that like the brain in the vat example would itself be like contradictory because in order to
it doesn't matter because you don't know if it's contradictory. That's the point, right? In other words, maybe we're psychologically predisposed to think that our logical categories match up to the world. That's the defeater for the retorsion argument for justification. Retorsion doesn't count as justification because later philosophers after. So again, think about back to Aristotle. This question comes up with Aristotle, and the sophists say, well, how do you know that logic is logical? And he says, by impossibility of the contrary. He gives a type of transcendental argument. He says, if you go against logic, you're assuming logic. And Aristotle thought that was a sufficient reply. But modern philosophers take that critique even further to demonstrate, no, actually it doesn't. That doesn't even get you to justification, because I can keep asking the question, well, even if it seems impossible otherwise, it doesn't get to justification, because the seeming impossibility does not mean that my conceptual scheme of logic therefore matches up to the external world. I just assume that. How do you know that that's the case? So it's not getting to justification because it's avoiding and just it's kicking the can back a step. Would you agree, Father Deacon? I mean, you wrote a paper on this. How would you give the example of the schizophrenic?
It just keeps moving the question back. And it never gets to the issue of justification. So you can just keep asking, why is that a justification? Oh, because this. Well, why is that answer a justification for your justification criteria? And what you notice is they just keep moving it back until they find something that just people agree with.
Yeah, and so like you get
agreement isn't justification.
Yeah, so basically they're saying the various options that you gave, it should be obvious how they don't get you to justification. Oh, well, it seems like it's reliable. Okay, well, why should we accept basic reliability as justification? Well, because we all agree on it. Well, because it's reliable, because it should work, because that's the only way. Well, how do you know it's the only way, right? So none of those things actually get you to solving the question that's being asked. They just kind of kick it down, kick the can down the road.
Does that include within justification that there has to be not like a why if there's logic, but like a how explanation?
No, if you read the Mannion paper, the point of the justification question is that you can't get justification in the way that these people are asking. It's not possible.
Let me put it another way, because I think the problem with criterion that Roderick Chisholm brings up, is actually good. So there's two issues within epistemology. What are we justified in believing? And then what makes our beliefs justified? But notice, in order to answer number one, what are we justified in believing, you have to actually have the answer to number two, what makes our beliefs justified. But in order to have an answer to number two, it's referring back to one. And so you never are able to get an answer to the first or the second. That's actually a vicious circle, right? Each one implies the other one, and you can't answer one without the other, and so you never get an answer to the criteria of justification.
Yeah, like they try to posit like evidentialism or some form of Methodism, but those fall into like the same process of like question begging. I think that's what he concludes, is that like most of the alternatives are just going to be question begging, unless some people embrace skepticism, which itself would be question begging.
Right, and if you read the Mannion paper, you'll notice that what he does in the section where he critiques all the attempted rescues for justification in a foundationalist system, he points out that they are circular. So it kind of illustrates the point that we were making in terms of your first question, was that justification criteria and justification questions ultimately end up circular.
Also, think about this. Here's an objection to reliabilism. Suppose crystal ball gazing is reliable, and you can use a track record argument that's reliable. Does that equal justification? Like, would any analytic philosopher actually say, oh, well, that's great, that works for a justification? They'd be like, no, just because something's... So there's a bunch of counterexamples of things that even if I allowed to be reliable, they're going to say, but that doesn't equal justification. In fact, an animal can have, let's say, a basic level of, if they form some sort of kind of cognitive states that are reliable, if we grant that, none of us would say that, oh, well, then that's a justification.
Yeah, I think about other examples like that. Like, farmers, or what's that farmer's almanac where they like study the patterns of how nature and rain and animal, like, oh, my animals always run around in circles before an earthquake, so I'm justified in believing in earthquakes coming because the animals run in circles, and it's been a reliable guide in the past. Okay, but does that really get you to justification because the animals running in circles is a reliable past guide for when earthquake? No, it's not.
I've seen some maybe objections to that by saying that in order to find that like non-arbitrary, like reliable method, that we have to like use a form of abduction versus like induction and deduction, where we'll have like an inference to the best explanation, and you could argue like, oh, how do you know what's the best explanation? Like you guys are pointing out, like you could look at those farm animals and not know where they're going to be, if they're justified or not, and like in order to solve that, I've seen objections saying that we would have to form some like epistemic criteria, and they would argue that parsimony is important because if we were to have more assumptions, that would mean that there's like more ways our theory could go wrong, and then like they build upon that.
Notice it's the exact same problem that you get with people approaching ethics. All these people are doing is giving reports and descriptions. I'm giving you a psychological report about what I believe. But you bring up the objection, you're in the wrong category. We're asking about the normative. Ought that to be the way? So people do this in ethics all the time. Well, this is just what people believe, therefore it's all relative. But you're making a category mistake. We're not asking what people do or how they came to their beliefs, but the ought question. Ought they to come to those beliefs, i.e., what are the right reasons? So they're fundamentally, both in the case of the ethics and the epistemological, collapsing the normative into just a story, a description. Let me just report to you things that I think. But as Plato said, reporting Socrates, I don't care about doxa and opinion. I care about episteme. You're in the wrong category.
Oh, yeah. So, like, the objection would be, like, I can give an inference for, like, a best explanation, but that's not, it's just a report. I would have to give an ought claim on why we ought to prefer the inference to the best explanation.
Right. Or, this is all that we can do. It's abduction. They're setting out the criteria. And you'll notice this when people come on here all the time. They'll just tell us what they believe. But we don't care about what people believe. We care about, ought we to believe that?
By the way,
what do they do? They just give you another belief and another belief and another belief, right? And it's like they never get to the category of the, but ought we to believe that?
Right, and it's the Plantinga response to this. So he points out, is if you have the Wood book, the rejections to reliabilism come up on page 135, and he gives an example of the Franco dream, which is a really good example for this. But he points out at the bottom, which touches on the point that Father Deacon is making, which is that it's not just a question of are the beliefs reliable, or do they work, but do they work in the right way? And that's what reliabilism can't answer. It's not just, well, these are reliable beliefs that we have. Okay, but are they reliable in the right way? And he gives an example of, let me read this section if you want me to. He says, Franco is a painter obsessed with just one object, his boyhood home, in Pontito, Italy. Not Franco, the dictator, right? While in his early 30s, Franco undergoes an illness marked by high fever, weight loss, and delirium. Precisely what illness affected Franco is never conclusively settled. What is clear, though, writes Sachs, is that while the ill Franco began having uncannily vivid dreams about his hometown in Pontito, these dreams and images would remain with him after he was awake. Dreams with the most microscopic, veridical detail beyond anything else that he could consciously remember. Sachs then speculates that these dreams were Franco's particular way of coping with psychologically traumatic departure during his childhood, Quote, what seems to have occurred by singular fortuity, was the concurrence of an acute need, not a psychological state. Acute need and a psychological state. For if his sense of exile and loss and nostalgia demanded a sort of world, a substitute for the real world that he had lost, his experiential seizures now supplied what he needed, an endless supply of images from the past, rather an almost infinitely detailed three-dimensional model of his hometown Pontito, an entire theater or a simulacrum in his mind that he could walk about in and explore. This account illustrates that Franco's experiential seizures leave him not just with a reliable memory, but with an astounding capacity for almost total recall in a three-dimensional detail. Scenes so complex that they exceed anything that normal memory could reproduce. Franco's memory isn't just reliable, it is in fact super reliable. It seems that Franco's beliefs are thus justified on the basis of reliabilism because they meet the reliabilist criteria. However, we all hesitate then to accept that this judgment, that it's reliable or that it's justification, because of the accidental and even pathological way in which his memories were produced. Whatever other problems may be beset by reliabilism, this example suggests that reliability cannot be a sufficient justification. Something more than merely having a reliable series of beliefs must be necessary. Plantinga calls this a proper function. Not only does the justification that knowledge requires involve cognitive faculties working properly, but that they must work properly in the right environments and in the right way intended by God to function according to Plantinga. Thus, reliabilism's difficulties stem from efforts to work out the theory in sufficient detail. So it's not enough to just say that, well, the beliefs are reliable. Okay, but this guy's dreams were super reliable, but nobody would say that his memories and thoughts were working in the right way.
And then, is there, going to be an account on, exactly how a belief should be formed in the right way at the right, moment?
No, the point is that these questions are never ending. You will never get to what the people, because these come out of a foundationalist background. So all of these questions of justification are in the situations of people with a classical foundationalist type of mindset and setting. Even coherence theory, Wood argues, ends up being another version of foundationalism. So even the attempts to get around these questions end up in the same problems. And the point we're making is just that secular philosophy can't solve these problems. They can't provide the justification because they don't have the God principle in the system which resolves the problems. You'll never get the justification problem solved with beginning from human autonomy. That's the point. And that's the point Mannion makes, is that these are dead-end questions. They lead to self-destruction. That's the point.
On this last point, do you think, I think maybe one method, you could probably correct me on how you could get out of this, is saying that, because those are, in these cases, you could argue for a type of fallibilism regarding justification, that in some cases our knowledge can be fallible, as long as they generally get towards a reliable correspondence with reality.
Oh, well, but I mean, again, it's just begging the question that you've already correctly parsed out your beliefs into the ones that are reliable and the ones that are not reliable. So there's a prior criteria problem again.
I think that's a fair critique. So yeah, thank you guys for your time. I think those are good objections.
Yeah, and again, you had really good questions. I appreciate those. The point is not that, we don't do justification because the problems are insoluble. No, the problems are best solved by the Christian paradigm, where we aren't in the boat of trying to bootstrap and build a system from the human mind, the human autonomous experience, which are basically meaningless. That's why their projects fail. It's not that there's something inherently wrong with the idea of justification, but in the Christian paradigm, justification is going to be given according to the system, according to that paradigm. For the non-theist, these are all secular attempts at constructing and system building for trying to, in an autonomous way, give an account of knowledge, and they always fail because they're missing the most important part, God. That's the point. They're never going to work.
Fair enough. Thank you for your time.
Sure. Yeah, good questions.